recording.
Good morning, distinguished participants. On behalf of the United Nations Training and Research Institute, UNITAR, New York office, I wanted to give you a warm welcome for these 4-day sessions entitled Gender Equality in the International Rights Framework. This has been organized jointly with the UNITAR and the University of Pennsylvania Carrick Law School. As you know, this is one of the most pressing topics that we have the international arena today. We managed to put together with Ranjita and Paloma Duran a diverse panel of speakers this week addressing very important topic of gender equality. The curriculum was prepared in order to highlight the need and the importance on achieving after Beijing plus 25 that a couple of months ago, the President of the General Assembly organized a high-level meeting in the United Nations General Assembly in order actually to see how we are advancing and outstanding on the issue of after the pandemic and during the pandemic, because gender equality is one of the major problems that this pandemic has put forward. In the word of the President of the General Assembly during the Beijing plus 25 commemoration, he says, as we recover from the pandemic, we must build back better to improve the life of women and girls. We must renew our commitment to protect women's rights and make women's participation in peace and security and humanitarian actions meaningful and sustainable. So this is the idea of these I don't want to call them training, I don't want to call them capacity, I wanted to call them conversation among leaders, women leaders and women's entrepreneurs to see how we can benefit from each other's experience for our institutional memory, for what we do. So UNITAR is a training and capacity building institute, but mostly I encourage all the time sharing experience, sharing institutional memory of actions or programs or projects that we deliver. This pandemic has brought us a lot of limitations because we are, as human beings, we tend to be social, and the United Nations was created actually to meet. It's a place to meet, to shake hands, to discuss, and to agree to disagree, as normally we said in the United Nations. But COVID-19 has put us apart. It's telling us to stay away from each other, cover your faces and don't even interact among yourself, even with your loved ones. So we have to come with a very resilient attitude, and we have to use what human being has been developing in the latest decades, information technology tools. And that is why we are here today. Thanks to that innovative approaches, that's thanks to the BTC possibilities to come together, to discuss, to talk, and to agree in topics that are relevant for humankind today. And gender equality, women issues, protection of the girls and child is one of the most pressing topics. So I am very pleased, I am very honored to open these conversations, as I mentioned to you, with all these known professors, with Ranjita from University of Pennsylvania, with Paloma Duran, with Professor Eva Alcon, and with distinguished ambassador that will join us in a couple of minutes. As a clearinghouse, I will invite you to be active, to engage in the conversation, to use the chat button to express your opinion, to make questions or comments, because we would like to have this in a very interactive way, if not a lecturing process, as I always said to my participants or events. We wanted to learn from you too. So this program is 4 sessions, is one every morning from now to the Thursday. So I encourage you to be with us all this time and to explore all these issues. We will explore topics as the Beijing Platform of Action, and his improvement for 25 years, the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination against Women, Women, Peace and Security, among other topics, SDG 5, gender equality. So how we are been doing it and how we has been really taking these issues seriously, institutionally and personally, because I always stress also this point. We don't change ourselves or behavior, we will be in not position to change other people or institutions' behavior. We have to understand ourselves and we have to change ourselves in order to improve in these areas. So as we said to our kids, education start at home. In these issues also, we start at home. And so hopefully this process will give us good points, good lessons for us to improve personally and to make institutions stronger in the issue of gender equality and women's empowerment around the world. We owe that to the younger generations to come. More important than today is the legacy we leave. And maybe I am talking now feeling more like a father than official of the United Nations, but I would like to leave something better for my younger sisters, for example, or for their daughters. This is my commitment, and that's how I embrace all this time when we engage in the United Nations Sustainable Development Agenda and gender equality and women issues are at my heart. So thank you very much for being with us. I have our partners from Pennsylvania, Ranjita, and I will yield the floor to her for making his comment. But I will not yield before expressing our deepest gratitude to Ranjita and to Paloma for all the effort they has put in together in making possible this program in the sessions to come. Later on, we will introduce properly the panelists, distinguished women's leaders, and hopefully we're going to learn something from them. Welcome again, enjoy the sessions, and then interact, and please be safe as much as you can. Ranjita, I'm going to yield to you now with this little opening words from myself. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Suazo, for that very broad overview of our global conversation and the ways in which you located this global conversation at this important moment in our history. Today especially marks an important moment in our history. As we come together as a global community, I see that we have global leaders from across the world, from New York to New Zealand, from Afghanistan to Accra, and my own student, Levi, has joined us, as I see, and I am proud to host these new global leaders who are going to be part of the global reset, the global reawakening as we work towards building back better. So it is this global reset and this global recovery that animates our discussion within this important framework of gender in the international law framework. So today we come together to celebrate the coming together of many anniversaries, Ambassador. Today begins here in the United States, Women's History Month. This is March 1st, a month to share the untold stories of women. And we are, as we speak and as we connect with women and men from around the world, we are just 1 week away from International Women's Day, March 8th. We are also at the very cusp of the Commission on the Status of Women, which will bring together women and men from around the world virtually to look at ways in which women's empowerment, women's leadership can animate building back better. So this global conversation takes place in the shadows, in the margins of the Commission on the Status of Women. We are also a year after marking the 25th anniversary of the Fourth World Beijing Conference and the Beijing Platform of Action. And today's conversation focuses on that historic moment 25 years ago, and how those lessons of the Beijing conference still continues to inform us 25 years later. So today, ambassadors and global leaders, we are at a global inflection point. It is a time of great crisis, but it is also a time for great renewal and a time for a great reset. And we connect around the world against the twin forces of the pandemic and a global economic crisis. There is yet another crisis, which is the assault on our democracies by populist and nationalist forces. And that is why it is wonderful to come together with these global leaders and diplomats from around the world. As I speak, I see young women and men connecting across the global divide of religion, race, and nationality. So as we are celebrating the rise of global social movements that address sexism and racism, it is wonderful for us to see the ways in which these young men and women, just today, 154 of you have come together to address the assault on our democracy, the ways in which sexism and racism are twin forces against democratic governance and a global reset and a global recovery. So it is a time to look forward on building back better and ways in which women and girls must be centered in that endeavor. It is also important to make gender in the international women's rights framework central to that initiative of building back and rely on the core principles of the international law framework. So before we begin this discussion, I want us to take a step back and look at that page in history 25 years ago. 17,000 women participants and 30,000 activists came from across the world to Beijing to celebrate the 4th World Women's Conference. And I see today, as we gather these young men and women from around the world, 155 of you, it is a microcosm of that Beijing conference, where women and men came together to address some of the most important issues that impacted women and girls. And at that conference, there was a historic speech that was made by then First Lady Hillary Clinton. And her fighting words, her clarion call to action, galvanized a whole global movement. At that conference, she said, if there is one message that echoes forth from this conference, let it be that human rights are women's rights, and women's rights are human rights once and for all. And I think that
I think Rangita is mute. Rangita, you are mute.
have I been mute the entire time?
No,
just the past
only the 2
minute.
last seconds. 2 last seconds.
I'm so sorry. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So the call that animated the participants at that historic conference was take Beijing home. And taking Beijing home meant that the declaration and the platform for action of Beijing, which affirmed the equality between women and men as a matter of human rights and a condition for social justice, was taken back home and helped to shape the legislation, the programs, the initiatives, and women in political participation. So today, our conversation is going to center on that Beijing Declaration and the platform of action, the 12 critical areas of concern that formulated the platform of action. And given the given the fact that we only have an hour for discussion, and I want to make this as participatory as possible, out of the 12 critical areas of concern, we are going to address 3 major issues: women in political participation and decision-making, women in education, and violence against women. Because these are 3 major areas that are important to address as we build back better. The Secretary General has said that we are facing a shadow pandemic, and he has called for a cessation of the crisis that we see both in our countries, in our communities, and in our homes. And as he has said, there is a war on women. And this war on women has to stop in building back better. So violence against women, as we know, has not only been exacerbated, but the ways in which the intersectional aspect of violence against women has been exposed by this pandemic. What we see is that those who are most disproportionately affected are minority women, refugee women, migrant women, LGBTQ women, and women of color. So it is important to understand the ways in which gender intersects with race. We will also have a discussion on the ways in which women in political participation, which was such an important pillar of the 12 critical areas of concern in the declaration and the Beijing platform for action, has once again become the lightning rod for discussion in 2020 and 2021. As we all know, the countries that are led by women have had a better track record of addressing the pandemic than other countries. So we are going to be addressing that dynamic against the backdrop of what I call the leadership paradox, that although women who lead their countries have a better track record, to date, in the legislative arenas of the world, women only constitute 25% of parliamentarians and legislative leaders. So what we see is that the corridors of power still are predominantly male. 75% of our decision makers, 75% of our parliamentarians and policymakers are male. What we also see is that in many places, women still cannot open a bank account or sign a contract. In 18 countries, in the year 2021, husbands can legally prevent their wives from working and in economic participation. This is data collected by the World Bank and its latest report that was released in March 1st of 2021. So when we speak about women's leadership, it is a comprehensive issue of women in political participation and women in public life. And then finally, the importance of women and education and training of women. And that is why we have with us President Eva Alcon, who is with one of the most preeminent universities in Spain to speak about the importance of girls' education. As we know, the pandemic has created a crisis that has impacted most of all girls and women's education. And marginalized women and marginalized girls have suffered the largest impacts of the pandemic. So with that, President Alcon, I'm going to ask you to speak to us about the ways in which your leadership in your university and your leadership in building a network of women presidents of universities is an important role, plays an important role in building back better. President?
Rangita, if I may, as we agree, I would like, because I feel especially privileged to have the president of my university here today. And just only to mention one thing is that, of course, the legal side is important to talk about gender, but I think that it's also important the political will and the tools that we have to try to change the culture. So I have been really very privileged because I participated in the Beijing Platform for Action negotiation in Beijing in 1995. I was a child. And then also I participated in the first preview of the political participation in the CSW. And I think that one of the important things for this conversation that we discussed also, it was that the lack of equality in any society is really the responsibility for everybody. And that's the reason because we need a conversation to try to engage male and female to try to promote this equality, taking into account that the work of the university is an important one. So Rangita didn't mention that the president of the university, Balcón, is also the responsible for the policies on equality in the Council of the Presidents of the University, which is an advisory board that maybe she can explain. And I think that the main idea is to ask also the president to share her experience and best practices working with universities promoting equality. So thanks, Rangita, and thank you again, Eva, and also the ambassador for being with us today. So Eva, you have the floor.
So good morning to all of you. First of all, I would like to start by saying that the Beijing Platform for Action was and is still today crucial for the development of the Spanish equality legislation, such as law against gender-based violence or law on equality. The law on equality compels each university to draw up and implement an equality plan. For instance, at the University Jaume I, we have 3 editions of the equality plan. And in addition, the law compels to establish gender equality units in each university. So I wanted to start by thanking all the people that participated in the Beijing Platform for Action, because it has been an image we have, it's a big concept that we follow, and I have to say that this platform has really helped universities to move forward on equality. If we start, we focus now on Spanish universities, I would like to inform you that at the moment we are 50 public and 33 private universities. Our activity generates an economic impact worth 65 billion euros. And in terms of university students, they represent 45% of the population aged between 18 and 24. I have to say that we have 15 percentage points more than in 1995, when the year where the Beijing Platform was approved. And in terms of women, we have 55% of university students that are women. But even if we have 55% of women students, even of that, although the women are the majority at universities nowadays, we have to acknowledge that there are still gender gaps in Spanish universities. And I would like to start by mentioning 2 of them, 2 gender gaps that we have at the moment. One is the glass ceiling. It's urgent to break the glass ceiling at universities. The first woman rector or president was appointed in 1982. 500 years later, the first university was founded. And nowadays, 40 years later, there are only 9 women rectors in the public universities and 8 women rectors in private universities. Is this a progress? Of course, this is progress, but it is very, very slow. In fact, at this rate, it will take approximately 120 years to achieve parity in the rector's office at the Spanish university. Another data that we have. Nowadays, there is only 1 woman full professor for every 4 men. And to become president or rector of a university, it's compulsory to be full professor. As you can see, breaking the glass ceiling at universities, at Spanish university, is really challenging. The other gap that I would like to mention, just to start this conversation, is what we call gender gap in STEAM studies, studies of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. At the moment, less than 30% of students, women students, enroll on studies dealing with science, technology, engineering, or mathematics. The problem is that if this gender gap continues, we are going to have negative effects in social and labor terms. And I'm going to give you an example. For instance, the best jobs are the ones who are better paid are in these areas. If women are not prepared to apply for the jobs, they would not be paid accordingly to good jobs, and in one way or another, they would be vulnerable. So these are the two of the gaps that we are facing at the moment at universities. And how are we facing that? We are facing that through the organization that represents Spanish universities that I may explain later on if you want. And we are also...
President, this has been wonderful to understand the ways in which women's leadership in academic institutions constitute a significant pillar of the Beijing platform of actions, educational decision-making role. But I want to now look at the ways in which women in power and decision-making in politics is an important part, Madam President, of building back better. So I'm wondering, is Ambassador Milan Vervier here, Pelayo?
Yes.
She's here?
I'm here, Rangita.
Okay, wonderful. Ambassador, you were there with then First Lady Hillary Clinton when she electrified the world with that clarion call to action. Women's rights are human rights, now and for all times. And you were the one who helped really create that defining moment and that defining charge to the world. Can you speak to us a little bit of 2 major issues, that moment in history and how that has shaped the global women's movement, and how the Beijing conference and the Beijing platform of action has helped to shape numerous laws on gender equality, on violence against women, on sexual harassment, on women's access to property, on women's rights in marriage, women's rights in divorce, and women's access to employment. I want you to look at both that moment in history and how it has shaped the next 25 years since the Beijing conference. And then I also want you to reflect, Ambassador, the ways in which still 25 years later, despite the fact that the Beijing conference and the Beijing platform called for 30% women in decision making as a minimum, as a threshold minimum, we are still 25 years later, we have only reached 24.9%. The percentage of women in parliament, in legislative bodies is only 24.9%, which is up from 11.3% in Beijing in 1995. And only 4 countries, Rwanda, Cuba, Bolivia, have reached 50% and more. Despite this, what I call the leadership paradox, as we know, during the time of COVID, we saw that it was the women-led countries that did best to address the pandemic. So there is this paradox, there is this tension there. So I want you to first speak about Beijing and the ways in which that shaped a new generation of leaders and a new generation of legislation, and the paradox of women still being underrepresented in corridors of power. Thank you, Ambassador.
Well, thank you, Rangita. It's good to be with you and with so many others who have done so much. And I'm particularly excited to see the new generation with us, because we have all been on a journey, and the journey is going to be largely continued by many of you. I just want to follow up quickly on what Eva said about Spanish universities. I'm at a university now at Georgetown, and we have similar issues. I think it doesn't matter what country we're talking about, but women still haven't taken their place in the power structures of the universities, in the divisions of professorships and tenure, as well as the STEM fields, and we can talk more about all of that. But I want to add one other area, which is in many courses, there is very little assignment of works by women experts in the field, and working on syllabi is also another issue. But let's go to Beijing, where so much of this started, actually 25 years ago last year. And it was a moment in time, like so many threshold moments have been for the women's movement. When I was working with Hillary Clinton at the time and preparing for Beijing, she was invited by the Secretary General of the UN to give one of the speeches. And I must say it was a tough assignment to know what really to speak about. But I want to say, particularly to the young people who are part of this discussion today, that in those days, women's rights weren't even chiseled in international human rights law. It was a time when domestic violence, for example, was not considered a violation of any law. It was not considered criminal behavior. It was cultural, it was private. There was no obligation to governments to protect their citizens. So it was a different moment in time to continue to say that gender equality, equality between men and women on these issues was foremost in the consideration of the organizers of this conference. So when Hillary Clinton got up, and in that speech, some of which Rangita already expressed to you, and said that women's rights are human rights, that was in many ways an astounding statement for many, although not for those who have been pioneering and struggling in the trenches to really achieve full human rights, women's rights fully encompassed in human rights. And she went through a litany of abuses against women, human trafficking, snuffing out the life of a girl just because she's born a girl, honor killings, dowry burnings, domestic violence, rape as a tool of war. And after each of these, she said, this is a violation of human rights. Even though these women's rights were not encompassed in many ways in human rights by many, and even though I can tell you, going to Beijing, there was a huge protest about this conference taking place in China because they were violators of human rights and continue to be. But the human rights organizations, many of them, were among the most vocal opponents. And it was the women's groups that said, no, this is important to the advancement of our human rights. So the concept of women's rights as human rights was extremely fundamental to this conference. And it was frankly the African women who, in a preceding conference in Nairobi, said this issue of violence against women has to be tackled once and for all. And it figured very prominently in the discussions, in the declaration, and in the platform for action. So the platform for action that was adopted covered 12 areas. And we are talking from what Rangita said, about 3 of them significantly. Women accessing decision-making and political empowerment, education, and violence against women. All 3 in many ways, not to be siloed, because there is synergy among all of them. And I think one of the things we often do, because you can't work on everything at once, is silo these issues, but we have to see their connectivity. And I think when it comes to political participation, which is in the whole arena of women accessing power, and in many ways, the pushback, the constant pushback, and the efforts that hold women back in these areas has to do with accessing power and not sharing power. And while we have indeed made a lot of progress in 25 years, we have a lot of work that continues to be done. So as you heard, in the political arena, for example, we seem to be stuck at 25%. You know, it is an accomplishment, although there was a 30% marker that was put out. And we have made progress through a variety of means, but pretty much there hasn't been much movement, although in some places are ahead of others. Some places are farther behind. Similarly, in terms of heads of government, heads of state, those numbers are extremely small. For women, they came to enormous prominence, as you've heard during this struggle with COVID, because it has been the women heads of state and heads of government who, for the most part, have had the greatest success in trying to staunch this virus from spreading. And there's been a lot of work today as to what are those characteristics in women's leadership that others could learn from, not just women, but leaders across the board, in terms of accepting science, speaking honestly to the population, being empathetic, a whole lot of characteristics, but the value of women's leadership has come through. And I think the more women that enter the public fora, the more that it will be easier for the next tranche of women, like the younger women we have with us today. Beyond that,
Ambassador, you spoke about those important values that women leaders bring to their decision making, and we've been studying Jacinda Ardern's leadership in New Zealand, and we see that those values are values of empathy, consistency, transparency. And I think those 3 values are important to women and leadership in general. So when you spoke, because I know I see these questions coming from our next generation of leaders, what is that 25% marker? And going back to the Beijing platform of action, and it's called for 30% as a minimum critical mass of women in parliament or in decision making. What it says is that unless there's 30% women, that they will not have the impact that they desire, that you need that critical mass. That number is important. If not, women will not be able to shape the change that they want to see. So I think that's important to see, that we have to progress towards that. And so going back to both Paloma and to the president, I know there are questions about the digital gender gap, and the president spoke about her own focus on STEM education. So we see that globally 1.7 billion girls and women do not own a mobile phone today in 2021. And during the pandemic, this reached a crisis mode because women and girls were excluded from both education as well as accessing information. So Paloma, I'm now going to turn it over to you so that you could have a conversation with the president on both the digital gender gap at a time of crisis, and how do we address building back better within that framework.
Yeah, thank you, Rangita, and thank you, Ambassador, because I think that it was very significant, really, all the approach on the political sides. I'm not sure really that the quotas are the solution for everything, but at some point maybe the quotas is an important conversation, and in fact is one of the seminars that we normally had in the university some years ago, with some colleagues in favor and other colleagues against, and it depends on the countries, the situation, and many other things. I think that the main goal is really to promote gender equality and to have more women. And that's the reason, because I would like that maybe the president of the university can finish maybe the conversation that she started about the world of university and the role of the university really in promoting this equality. I think that, I don't know if there is any lesson learned maybe from the side of the Council of Presidents or maybe from the University Jaume I, just promoting this equality, taking into account that education is really the tool to promote equality. Over to you, President.
Thank you, Paloma. Well, I agree with the ambassador when she said that most countries share the same concerns, and that's true. And maybe that's the main reason why in Spain, different universities, we share the concern, and also we have gathered together in the Council of Rectors in order to face those gender gaps that we have to face nowadays, because we consider that at universities, we are educating the leaders of the future. And also, we acknowledge that we are a social reference. And for that particular reason, in 2018, we set up the Office for Equality Policies. And what was our aim? Our aim was, first of all, to promote equality on the university political agenda. The second point was to make women's leadership visible. Sometimes women are good researchers, but our research is not visualized, is sometimes ignored. So one of our aims was to make women's leadership visible. Then we have tried to coordinate different actions within the Spanish university systems, and more important than that, we have been acting as an effective interlocutor with governments, both national governments and regional governments. And more recently, we have presented the strategy University 2030. And this is an action plan for the next decade. And in this new strategy that we have presented to our Ministry of Education, Ministry of also Economic Education Ministry, in this strategy, equality between women and men has been incorporated and has been claimed to be a cross-disciplinary approach. I am not going to summarize the action plan, but I would like to point out 3 main challenges that we are going to cover in the next decade. 2 of them I have already mentioned, that's breaking the glass ceiling. I mean, we need to be part of society. Women need to be part of those body of people that take and make decisions. We also need to eliminate gender bias in course choice. There is no, it's not a reality that technology and science is for men and women most of the time take care of people. This idea should be demonstrated that is not true. And it is especially important for younger generation. And finally, another of our aims is to promote co-responsible work-life balance. Nowadays, we know that most women continue to do domestic and care tasks. And this affects negatively to their careers. There are studies that demonstrate that that's true. We also know that in mid-level responsibility, in those jobs that they do not have a lot of responsibility, we will always find women. But when we look at high positions, we frequently find men. And we have started to implement actions. One of them is constant vigilance to all the positions of responsibility. Because
so, President, I'm going to take this conversation now back to Ambassador Verviers and recall that moment in history 25 years ago when then First Lady Hillary Clinton reminded us that women's rights are human rights and also addressed issues of trafficking, human trafficking and honor crimes. So, Ambassador, as you know, 72% of all human trafficking in the world, that women and girls constitute 72% of all human trafficking victims globally, and 137 women are killed by a family member every day. And during COVID, these numbers increased. There was a spike in the number of women and girls who were trafficked. There was a spike in the number of girls and women who were subject to violence against women. And around the world, we saw that it most negatively impacted women of color, women in refugee camps, migrant women, LGBTQ women, and women with disabilities. So in building back better, as you said, we need to look at these issues in an interconnected way. That these are issues that are so inextricably interlinked, whether it's women in decision-making, women and education, and women and violence. So, Ambassador, what are your thoughts for advising governments and the next generation of leaders on building back better, centering women and girls, to not only address the disproportionate impact and the ways in which the pandemic has exacerbated violence against women, but to make use of this moment in history as an opportunity to address the root causes of violence against women, which is the devaluation of girls and women?
Well, that's certainly true, that fundamentally it is about devaluation, not having the same value. COVID is going to cover everything that we're working on. It is not just a moment in time and the pandemic ends. Because of the inequalities that have been exposed, we have a lot of work ahead of us, and we should seize the moment not to build back just better, but equally to bring about the kinds of changes we need to see. In terms of the violence piece, there are many arenas in which actions need to be taken. And let me just say education, because girls, if we've made any success since Beijing, it's the number of girls who have access to primary education, more secondary, although it's still a challenge, both in terms of access and quality. But many tens of thousands of girls are not in school because of this pandemic. What will it take to get them back to school? This has got to be a priority, but many will already have been lost because in terms of the lack of economic opportunity in their families, they have gone out to raise money as best they can. Much of that has been putting them into great risk. Many of these girls have been trafficked. Many of these girls have been severely sexually abused, etc. So we have to focus on the services that they need, but also on getting them back to school and understanding the primacy of education. Now, I'm bursting with all of the things I want to say in response to what I've heard, but just that simple mobile phone that you said there is lack of access by much of the world. That phone, not the most fancy iPhone, the simple mobile phone is a tool of development. The phone today is critically important for women who are living in situations where they don't have the kind of opportunities everybody in this discussion has. It is a tool for education. It is health education. It is a tool to ward off violence against women, to transmit those messages, to be a protective instrument. It is a tool for enormous economic opportunity because it's how women are transferring their money through mobile phone banking, transferring their money that they can save it safely and not have it stolen, and also have the resources where they need them, as they always want to do, to send their girls to school. So this simple tool is connected to STEM education, is connected to warding off violence against women, is connected to empowerment of all kinds. And yet we talk about them all separately. And it is connected to development. Just like political power today has to be seized by a variety of means. One, working with political parties because they are the gateways to a lot of empowerment, but we have barriers to networks for women, barriers to the kind of training they need, barriers to finance. We can address all those barriers if we put our minds to it. And one of the ways that we've seen progress, yes, through quotas, but also through activism, through the way large groups of people have come together, a lot of young women and other women, to say enough already, and moved women into positions of political elective office. And there are many organizations that have been started. You know, in the United States, we've got Running Start with the young women. We've got Empower, just proliferations, and they have moved our numbers significantly. So a lot of it has to do what each of us needs to understand, that we are not powerless. We don't have to depend on these other instrumentalities. We need them and they need to do their part. But so can we be pressure points, particularly when we come together and to act on these issues that are so vital to needing to be addressed.
So you were, sorry, yes, Paloma, would you like to continue this conversation?
Yes,
Building on what the ambassador said, that a mobile phone is not only a tool of empowerment, it's almost always a lifeline. It is a lifeline, especially during COVID, where you needed a mobile phone for mobile money, to transfer money, to conduct business, and obviously to have access to education, and also in terms of crisis. We also saw the ways in which school closures increased violence against women and teen pregnancies. And forced marriage, that families are forcing their girls in marriage because of the threat that the pandemic had created, both economically and socially. So we are going to spend an entire day, Paloma, on the work that you have done on mobile phones when we are speaking about the Sustainable Development Goals. But I thought, as a kind of a prelude to that conversation and drawing on the values of the Beijing platform, you could look at the connections between education, violence, and women in decision making.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I mean, the only thing that I wanted just to say, Ambassador, I fully agree with you. And of course, I'm not the panelist today. But you know, one of the things that I saw in the UN and also in the OECD is that sometimes it happens, all the picture that you describe really also happens in developed countries, including Europe, including the States, if I may say so. I mean, with all my respect, and in many countries with a lot of power and with a lot of tools. And unfortunately, the lack of equality is still there. So that's why I think that really education is very, very, very key to promote equality. And also, as you mentioned, activism. But you know, one of the things that we were discussing, Rangita and myself, is just precisely to see how can we work on violence against women and girls, that unfortunately is something that happened in all the countries, is not only for developing countries, it's all over the world. And that's why I suggested also to have the president of the university, because she is the president of a foundation which is called Isonomia, and it's a foundation where, linked to the university, they are doing training, research, and partnership with the local governments, which I think that is one of the most important pillars. So I'm going to give you the chance also to the president, if you like, to explain a little bit the experience that you have on that and also the impact of the work that you are doing through the foundation. Over to you.
Yeah, thanks again. And I really agree with what have been said so far, that all the advances towards gender equality aim to provide equality-based education. And equality-based education, if I am allowed to say, is the most powerful tool against gender violence. Because if we perpetuate that idea of stereotypes, for instance, if we do that, then we give the opportunity to certain people to think that they can treat differently women and men. And in this case, in case of the University Jaume I, as Paloma has already introduced, we have the foundation, the Isonomia, working since 2002. And what do they do? Well, they are doing great job in different areas. Education, research, but also the idea of knowledge transfer to society. So in terms of promoting equality between women and men in education, they do it through courses, conferences, seminars, congresses, and continuing training. But what they are really great at is because they promote a network of municipalities for equality. Different areas, different regions work with them, and they share experiences, awareness raising activities in all the area of Castellón where the university is located. In addition to that, they facilitate research and development of new models incorporating the gender perspective. And they help organizations, both private and public organizations, in implementing equality plans. For instance, they help us with the equality plan that we designed for the University Jaume I, or they help with the protocol for action in case of harassment, or they even collaborate with gender equality units. So this is what they have done so far. Advantages are being made, I have to say, but we have to acknowledge that these advantages are also slow, and we have progress that differ between countries. And that's why I keep on saying that university face nowadays a triple challenge. First one, preventing that the pandemic have an effect on the gender gap. We have already mentioned here in this conversation what can be the impact of pandemic in this gender gap, the importance of overcoming stereotypes and accelerating women's leadership. But as I was saying, in my opinion, equality-based education is crucial for narrowing all these gaps, and universities are essential to achieve that. Never before so many young women have been educating at universities. At the moment, half of those aged between 18 and 24 are at universities, and more women than before are enrolled in our universities. So now we are in need of solutions. And of course, there will be progress, but also risks of setbacks. Things has always been like that. But the effort, I think, is worthwhile, and the time to make it is without no doubt now, and to do that through universities and through foundations such as Isonomia, the foundation that I have the honor and the privilege of being president as well.
Thank you, Madam President. So something that Secretary Clinton shared with the world 25 years ago still resonates with us. And as Ambassador Vivier reminded us, that something that really was sparked at that conference was women's activism and this global women's movement that continues to inspire us, continues to be at the forefront of the changes that we are talking about. In fact, Radhika Kumaraswamy has said the most important social movement that we see today is the social movement against violence against women, the social movement that was developed to fight against violence. So the secretary, well, at that time, the First Lady, Hillary Clinton, when she said human rights are women's rights and women's rights are human rights once and for all, she also spoke of issues that I think are so important now against the backdrop of rising populism and nationalism, where she says women have the freedom to assemble, organize, and debate openly. It means respecting the views of those who may disagree with the views of their governments. And I think that is so important in the world now as we witness this rising tide of populism and nationalism. She also said it means not taking citizens away from their loved ones and jailing them, mistreating them, or denying them their freedom or dignity because the peaceful expression of their ideas and opinions. So, Ambassador Vervier, as you know, women human rights defenders are some of the greatest champions of human rights, and their rights are being imperiled because of what they stand for, what they stand up for. So, Ambassador Vervier, can you speak of the role of women human rights defenders in building back better? Because what we see in the 157 young women and male participants are that they are the bastion of that human rights bulwark. They are the human rights defenders of the 21st century. So what inspiring words of courage can you give them as they are in the forefront of building back better? It is their world, their future we are talking of.
Well, there is no doubt that women human rights defenders and women activists are on the front lines. Today, with the COVID problems that have been so exposed, it is women who are the first line of response. It is women doing the humanitarian work. It is also women who are being pushed back. What we're seeing already are trend lines where the women who are in these positions are being moved out of the decision-making process and others are taking over. So it's both first line of defense and pushback. And that's where movement comes in too. because, you know, whether it's violence against women and the movement that's gone global, for example, like the Me Too movement, or the work that men are involved in now, which is so critical in understanding that when women are violated, they also suffer from it. And when they're equal, they benefit from it. So there isn't one solution. We need to be part of a holistic response. And I think there is no doubt that the people at the grassroots level, women on the front lines, are that first line of defense. And in a process of concerted action, need to move forward as best they can. But it is going to take working together in large numbers, the kinds of things you're seeing the world over now, even where the worst pushback is taking place. And I want to go back to education for a minute, because education was one of the key prongs of the Beijing agenda for good reason. But there was also a focus on vocational education. There was a focus on education for your rights. There was a focus of education at all levels. Girls' education is something everybody says easily today. But 25 years ago, there weren't as many girls in school. Many felt they shouldn't be educated. We're still dealing with norms and entrenched practices that keep girls out of school. They need incentives to stay in school. And you need the education for a job, whether it's a job in the technical field. The most technical jobs need universities, but there are the kinds of trainings that women need at a more fundamental level to get through the portal for economic opportunity. So education at the university, absolutely critical for all the reasons you've heard, but we need education at all levels, and we have to focus on all of those levels. And to Paloma's point about the United States, no question, we have deep, deep divisions. I'm not just talking about the developing world. This is something that affects all of us. And the issues of poverty, the issues of race are intersectional to the big issues we're discussing. And if we want solutions in the ways that we've been discussing today, we have to appreciate the need for a gender perspective in all of the areas, or we cannot get to that solution in a way that will build back better.
So I am now going to turn to our audience, which consists of 160 young leaders from around the world. I think, and I want to thank UNITAR and Pelayo and Ambassador Suarez for convening this and bringing together this force of voices from around the world. And to your point, Ambassador, over 111 million girls are living in the world's least developed countries, where education to them does not exist. So we've already, even before the pandemic, we had 111 million girls who were disenfranchised. And going back to your friend and your former colleague, the First Lady Hillary Clinton, when she was Hillary Rodham, at the Wellesley commencement address, talked about the values of education. She said the goal of education is human liberation. So it is about, education is about liberating the human spirit. So with that, I'm going to now turn to our young interlocutors. Pelayo, can you help moderate the questions?
Brangita, before to go to the questions, if I may, because I was tempted just to say it's a very interesting conversation. But one of the things is that institutionally speaking, I think that there are many tools really to promote education. I perfectly remember, for instance, the negotiation on children and armed conflict in the Security Council in 2002, where for the first time, the members of the Security Council introduced the reference to education for girls precisely during the conflict and after the conflict, because unfortunately girls are the most affected group of population in these specific situations. What happened is that after, it was in 2002. So it's almost, 20 years later, that we are still thinking how to do so. So my point is that I think that institutionally speaking, we have the tools. The point is, how can we really engage the young generations to promote that? And to be honest, I think that we need to change a little bit the narrative and to move from the victimism to activism, which I think that is an important change from Beijing up to now. In Beijing, probably we can use the victims side. I mean, I don't want to enter in this debate because I know that it's very sensitive, but I think that now we need to recognize that we have the tools in many countries to work to ensure the access to education for girls. But the point is, I mean, how are we going to do the follow-up? And how are we going to push in our governments and in our leaders really to promote and to use the resources for that? So I'm sorry, but I was really tempted to say so.
This is very, very important. So Ali Otis, maybe you could help identify a few questions that we can focus on in the next 15 minutes.
Of course, yeah. Let's see, I will read the first one that I see here. Sana is asking, how does the Beijing platform tie in with the SDG goals and specifically the gender equality targets? And how can we help contribute to those targets?
Can we take a few questions, because we are going to be speaking about the SDGs on the last day. So I just want to get a sense of what the questions are, and then we can distill them in our final responses. All four of us will be given 3 minutes each for a final response.
Great, let me find a couple more questions. We've had some throughout the session.
I think there were questions on violence against women. There were questions of technology as a tool to address violence, as a tool for women's empowerment. There were questions on the rise in the rollback of gains that were made. So maybe
I'm seeing another one is, go ahead, Rangita.
No, go on. So sorry, go.
So I have another one that says, how can we engage the young girls in our rights as women? So engaging young girls in the fight. So we have this, and then we also.
That's an excellent question that we can all answer to in different ways. So I'm going to start with the president. President, since you are the president of a university that trains the next generation of both men and women, can you speak to how you engage girls and young women in building back better? President? President? Eva? Maybe we can go to Paloma.
Yeah, I think that the main, because there are some questions, Eva, with references to your point about the access to education. And the point is how, I don't know if you get the question from Rangita, how really to promote the engage of young girls. Yes.
Yeah, that's a key issue. I think we have agreed that we have the tools, we have the protocols, but we have to move forward. And obviously, the best way to move forward is being able to engage young generation. And probably the best way, or what we are not doing right at the moment, is waiting until students arrive at university. Sometimes if we wait until they arrive to university, it's too late. And that's why most universities and schools organize activities that address at primary and secondary school level. And in this way, the main idea is to help young girls to become aware of the importance of belief in themselves, believe that they can do it, that it's possible. And by doing that, we empower the girls for the future. If we wait until university, probably is too late. And similarly happen in relation to violence. I mean, the idea of that we are a society against violence, against gender violence, is something that has to be learned from the very beginning. And one important thing that I haven't mentioned before, and is that when we talk about gender equality, we are not only focusing on girls, we are focusing on society, which means that we are addressing the policies towards girls, boys, men, and women. And this is the only alternative that we have to consider to get a society which in the long run, I really hope will be more gender equal.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam President.
Rangita, I'm going to have to leave a little before. So let me just say that it is the young people today who give me the hope. If you were to ask me what makes me optimistic, it is this generation. Because every place I turn, I see activism. I see a proliferation of NGOs that are being formed. I see girls banding together against harassment, banding together to create new ways of doing things, growing in confidence. I started an NGO years ago, and to this day, one of the keystones was mentoring. And when girls are mentored on skills development, and I would visit them several years later and say, what did you get out of the program? Is it benefiting you enormously? The first thing they all did, no matter where in the world, was start another mentoring program so that they could be giving back and plowing forward with the younger people behind them. So I just see, if you look at the movements today, it is young people who are intrinsically involved in all of them. And it should give you hope. Years ago, Rangita was very significant in starting a public service program for young women. And they came from all over the world to universities to really spend a week to develop those skill sets. Why? Because the recognition was, if we were ever going to have parity, if we were ever going to have equality, we needed to unleash what the younger generation represented. And many of those women today are in elective office, local office, moving up, making a difference. So combining civil society activism with getting into public positions of responsibility, no matter at what level, it is a real force for change in our world.
Thank you, Ambassador. So I too have to leave early, so I'm going to go next and ask my friend Paloma to conclude. Two things that I think are central to building back better within the landscape of the Beijing platform of action. One is the importance of legal change. And we have yet to speak about this, the importance of changing laws and law reform to empower women. And just to give you one case study, in Sierra Leone, during the pandemic, the male education minister, who was educated at MIT and Harvard, and he's a very innovative engineer who is the male minister, he changed the law which had disallowed pregnant girls to go to school. So he changed that law. He outlawed that and said, even if you're pregnant, you can attend public school. Because as you know, during the pandemic, there is a greater chance that vulnerable girls are become pregnant. And so a law that disallowed girls from attending school was completely disempowering. So he changed that law, and adolescent pregnant girls were now allowed to go to school. So that was an important tool that the law played in access to education for girls. The second case study that I want to share with you is about women in political participation. Yes, although we may be divided about quotas, quotas have helped women to achieve agency and political participation. So in India, when the law was changed to allow a minimum of 30% women in the Panchayat Raj or in the village council, 1 million women were elected to the Panchayat Raj. And one story that I would like to share with you is that when women were elected, one of the first things they did was to build toilets so that girls did not have to go to the jungle in the night, but could use the toilet. So there was this kind of causality between women in leadership and girls' empowerment, girls' security, and girls' safety. So two major elements that I think we need to make central in building back better, drawing from the legacy of the Beijing conference and the Beijing platform of action, is the importance of changing laws that disempower women, to ensure that these laws are consistent with the Beijing platform of action and other international human rights. And second, to ensure more women in power. Secretary Clinton wrote recently that it's now time to think of not women's rights only, but women and power. That it's women's rights are almost 25 years old. We need to think of how women can achieve power and not just their rights. So when women are in power, women make a considerable change, and women are then able to build back better. So with that, I am going to now ask my friend Paloma to spend the next 5 minutes on concluding this wonderful discussion. And thank you to our next generation of leaders who are going to take this charge and share this light of empowerment. Paloma?
Thank you, Raikita. I mean, maybe before I take the floor, I don't know if Eva wanted to say final remarks before just to conclude, or. Eva, I think that you are mute.
Can I ask questions?
I think that you are mute, Eva.
Is it okay?
Okay, now it's okay. Now it's okay.
Yeah, I would just thank you very much to all of you for inviting me to this event. I would like to invite you to know our university, to know the way we are conducting an equal rights, human rights, and also in the area of gender. For us, for our institution, equality-based education is crucial for narrowing the gender gaps that I have been mentioning, like breaking the glass ceiling, eradicating violence against women. And we are working together with the government, national and regional, government, regional government. And we are also working at all levels of education. For us, that's a key issue. It's a key issue to engage teachers from primary school, teachers from secondary school, and also the families. The families is important what students learn at home, at school, but not separately. I would say that they construct knowledge together within the family, together with the family, within school, and in collaboration between the family, school, and the government. And that's the policy that we follow, and that's we would like to continue in the near future.
Okay, thanks a lot, Eva, and also thank you to everybody. I think that one of the main messages that maybe we can distribute today is that we need really education on equality and education on freedom, because at the end, you know, each country is different, each history is completely different, each society has completely different needs, and I think that it's important really to take that into account. So of course, as I mentioned before, legal changes are very important, but we need also to have political will. We need also to have resources, and we need also to have engagement of boys and girls, and it was mentioned by Eva and also by other panelists. But also I think that even if we will have the chance to discuss about the content of the SDGs the last day, and also we are going to discuss CEDAW and women, peace and security in the next 2 days, I think that is important also. One of the important things today clear is the need of partnerships. public and private partnerships. We need, of course, to talk about the role of the governments, but we need also to talk about the role of the political parties, the civil society, the private sector, the trade unions, the parliaments, and I mean, all the actors really try to promote this equality. So thank you so much to everybody for the participation. Thank you to the panelists, mainly to Eva and also to Ambassador, that I think that she already left, but you know, for the time with us today. Thank you to the UNITAR team, because I think that they did, as always, an incredible job. And I don't know if we have Marco still with us, Ambassador Suazo, that I think that he wanted to say something, but I think that I don't know if he's with us, Pelayo, or...
He's currently not, but we will just want to remind everybody that tomorrow we'll be here at 12 using the same link for easy access to everybody. And just want to thank all of you, Eva, Paloma, Ambassador, Rangita. Really appreciate how you have moderated and intervened in this session, and all the participants who have attended.
Okay, so thank you so much and see you tomorrow. Thanks a lot.